My life be like. My life be like.
So right now, we're in Fort William Henry, y'all. And yeah, we're gonna do the ghost tours today. It's gonna be interesting. Check that out. And we're gonna go in the fort, we're gonna go check in and everything like that, and see what happens with this ghost tour. Let's see if we find any ghosts here. What do you think? Let's see what happens. We're inside the fort, y'all. And this is what they look like when they were battling here in Fort William Henry. Yeah, this is the beginning. So we're gonna wait for the tour, go around the gift shop, and it'll be cool. Something close to Fort William Henry. Little British Bears. Yeah, right? Slingshots. Got the snakes. Oh, they got a, what you call it? Yeah. A boomerang. We're in the dark, y'all. First ghost tour ever. And we're gonna do this today. This will be interesting. Can't wait to see this. We made it.
Welcome to Fort William Henry. Surprise, this is the original Fort William Henry. The original fort was built in 1755 by the British to be used during the French and Indian War. It was burnt down in August of 1757 by the French after they won it in a 6-day-long siege. We are actually smack dab in the middle of the anniversary of that siege week, so good job picking today to come. Now, the French did win it in a 6-day-long siege. That may not seem too terribly impressive, but it was actually quite remarkable. The architect who designed this fort, William Ayres, said it could probably last 2 days under siege if the British tried really, really hard. That was because this was not Britain's main stronghold in the area during that war. That was actually 16 miles south of here at Fort Edward. This was built to be Fort Edward's alarm system in case the French ever decide to sail down the lake from Fort Carillon, which we today call Fort Ticonderoga, and attack, which they did, obviously, because, again, 6-day-long siege. The French were actually so impressed that the British managed to make this place last 6 days that they gave them a very gentlemanly terms of surrender. They told the British, we'll let you live and you can even leave. We won't even imprison you. You can take all of your possessions, any provisions you want. Take the weapons from the fort, the muskets mostly. You can have one cannon, but leave all of your gunpowder behind because we want to use that. And we'll give you an armed escort down to Fort Edward. Now, the British were so pleased with that prospect that they did not wait for the armed escort. They just grabbed their things and they ran for it. But they did forget something besides the escort. They actually forgot all of the wounded soldiers who were recovering in the emergency hospitals that our casemates of the West and East Barracks became. And they also forgot all of the camp followers, the wives, sisters, mothers, and children of the American individuals who were stationed here. Two very bad groups still left behind in a besieged fort, but the French said, don't worry about it. We'll give them the armed escort as soon as they're able to be moved. And so the British were reasonably happy because they escaped with their lives, and the French were incredibly happy because they got the fort they wanted. But the French allied Native Americans were very, very upset. They had been promised a 2-day-long battle and then payment at the end of it in the form of the provisions from the fort, the possessions of the British soldiers, the weapons from the fort, and proofs of kill. The French had put a bounty on the head of every single Englishman in the area because they were the American superior force. So the French wanted to try to dwindle down their troops a little bit by putting a bounty on the heads of the soldiers, hoping that the natives would go and kill soldiers even if they weren't technically allied with the French. They would take those proofs of kill, which were scalps, noses, fingers, toes, anything that they could cut off of a dead British soldier to prove they had killed a British soldier, and they would take those to French outposts, cities, and forts and exchange them for provisions, possessions, weapons, whatever they wanted. And so the natives, when they came into the fort, found that their paycheck had just gotten up and ran out the front doors. So they were upset, and they decided to take what they were owed from the people who were left behind. This sparked the massacre at Fort William Henry. If you have seen or read The Last of the Mohicans, that is a dramatic retelling of the story of this fort. After a little while, the French did regain control of the situation, but by that point, everyone inside the fort had been killed. The natives had even caught up to the army marching down to Fort Edward and started to kill the stragglers as well. So the French had to decide what they wanted to do with the place. And they decided that actually, they didn't really want it after all. It was full of dead bodies. It had a huge hole in the northwest bastion, which is how they were able to win the fort in the first place. And this place smelled really, really badly. The British were not well known for their hygiene at the time, and they had a lot of issues with their well, but I'll tell you about that in a couple minutes. And so the French decided to burn it down rather than risk catching whatever all the British had here. And that's the first time this fort was burnt down. After a couple of weeks, the British did send a patrol to the area to see if they could salvage anything, but all they found were piles of ashes and dead bodies. And so they turned this site into a mass burial grave for everyone who had died during the siege and the massacre. We did get the original blueprints from Great Britain when we decided to rebuild the fort in the 1950s. So this is pretty accurate to how the fort would have looked, with three main differences. We would have had an east barracks here to match the west barracks, a south barracks to match the north barracks. You will find that we get very creative with our naming here at the fort. And we are 4 feet up and 10 feet to the left of the original placement of the fort. But otherwise, this is what it looked like, and this is pretty much exactly where it stood. But we are 4 feet up because most of the people who were killed and buried here are still buried below our feet today. We did very little excavating beyond what was absolutely necessary in the 50s when we decided to rebuild this place. We only did one archaeological day, and that was in this area behind me. And they had chosen that spot because it would have been the entrance into the casemate of the East Barracks. Again, that was an emergency field hospital here at the fort. They figured that would be a good place to go looking for things. We used to have a military crypt here. It's been filled in since April for reasons unknown to any of the guides. But it was a neat room. You could go down a small flight of stairs into a half building and see the site the archaeologists actually dug out. And a picture of what they found. Just 5 bodies with 4 heads and 11 legs. And no, the math does not add up, but I promise that extra leg is not interesting in the slightest. Amputation was the main form of surgery at the time, and so finding an extra leg on a pile of dead bodies in the hospital makes a lot of sense. But the missing head is a little bit more interesting because we think we figured out what happened to it. A French Jesuit priest named Pierre Robard came into the fort after the massacre to bless the dead, and we found his journal. In his journal, he recorded seeing a native Huron warrior leave the casemate of the East Barracks, proudly displaying a severed human head. He then watched that warrior walk out the main entrance and never saw him again. Several weeks later, there was the sale of a British head in Montreal, and the timeline matches up. So we think that that's where the head wandered off to. Now, we did do some forensic analysis on those bones that we found, and the report that we got from them was that the head that had been chopped off had been cut off with 4 to 5 blows from a blunt object. That was interesting because tomahawks at the time were sharpened to such a degree that you could slice through a human vertebrae in one hit. So the fact that it took 4 to 5 blows was really strange. We did some research, and it turns out that the natives who had allied with the French had decided that fear would probably be their best weapon in defeating the British. They wanted to scare the British out of wanting to fight in the first place, thinking that that might help them win the war. So, the natives would intentionally blunt the tomahawks they would use to chop the heads off of soldiers, hoping to make the death as brutal and painful as possible, so that maybe another soldier who witnessed that would think twice about fighting in the future. They also would take groups of prisoners out into the woods, where they would tie up all but one of the men. they would take that last man over to a tree and cut him right here. Fun fact, if you cut a human being right here, you can reach in and pull out their intestines, and it will not kill them immediately. They would nail that man's intestines to a tree and beat him with clubs and sticks until he ran around the tree disemboweling himself. And then go right down the line of soldiers. Now we do have a couple of kids. I do have one more story that's even grosser. Are you guys okay if it gets a little bit gruesome, grosser? Totally up to you guys. Yeah, we're gonna. I don't have to say it if you don't want me to.
Yeah.
Say it.
Say it?
We paid for it. Let's go.
Okay. So, has anyone heard of the man named Israel Putnam? Yeah, the name sounds familiar, right? No, that's a different. But Israel Putnam was a soldier in Fort Edward during the French and Indian War. But he is best known for being a commander at the Battle of Bunker Hill. His catchphrase is more famous than his name is. Don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes. That guy. Fun fact, actually, we recently learned that Israel Putnam is the son of Joseph Putnam, that one man who stood against the Salem witch trials, and the nephew of Thomas Putnam, who was the instigator of the whole thing. So, lots of ties. But he was a soldier in Fort Edward during the French and Indian War, and we do have his journal. And in his journal, he recorded one night hearing screaming in the woods. So he grabbed a group of men and went to investigate, because he is much braver than I am. And he recorded seeing a man leaning against a tree on the far end of a clearing when they finally got to where the screaming was. Except as they approached, they realized it was a British soldier who was not leaning against a tree, but he was actually tied there with his own intestines. His face had been cut here and peeled back behind his head. His lower jaw had been ripped off and thrown into the grass at his feet, so his tongue was flailing there as he was screaming. Something that's usually attached to the lower half of a man was shoved down his throat. The natives were so precise with how they did this, and it happened so often that we know that these men died of suffocation. So, again, they knew that fear was a tool, and they wielded it as well as they wielded their tomahawks. You have to remember that they were trying to defend their home. They were trying to get rid of the invading force. So they did exactly what they thought they had to do to make that happen. Another story of the Abenaki in particular brutality actually ties into our first ghost story. You guys ready for the spooky stuff? Yeah? Okay, I got like 6 people say yes. Everyone else, the door is over there. Good night. No. When we had our military crypt, again, you could go down a flight of stairs. And sometimes when you walked past it or took a photograph looking down the stairs, you would see a red mist standing at the base of them, vaguely human-shaped. We kind of assumed that this was a British soldier, and we did have that confirmed for us one evening. On one of our tours, there was a family who had brought their very young daughter. Now, this young daughter had absolutely zero interest in any of the history of the fort, so she was kind of wandering around the parade grounds. But we kind of let her go. Again, normally we like to keep everyone together, but her parents were keeping an eye on her. Also, she was big enough that we weren't worried about the skunks and raccoons that live in the walls kidnapping her. So we just kind of let her have free reign of the parade grounds. But as we made our way over to the well, which is our next stop, she had to run to catch up with us. And as she ran past the military crypt, she looked down the stairs and she froze. This little girl started screaming and crying. She was absolutely terrified. Her parents ran back over to her to see what had happened, and after a little while of hyperventilating, she did tell them that she saw a red man with a face of ground beef standing at the base of the stairs looking up at her. She then proceeded to detail down to the buttons on his coat and the tricorn hat he wore the dress of a British regular soldier, except she insisted that he had a face of ground beef. We did some research because that was new to us. And we found that the Abenaki, who had allied with the French, believed that how you looked in the moment of death is how you would look for the rest of eternity. So to add insult to injury, so to speak, to the British soldiers they were about to kill, they would sometimes peel their faces off before they dealt that killing blow. Because they believed that if they took a man's face before he died, he wouldn't have a face in the afterlife. And so he'd spend eternity alone because no one would recognize him and talk to him. To further their scare tactics, they would take those faces and cure them and wear them as masks into battle. Because if you think about it, if you're a British soldier whose brother died several weeks ago, and after these weeks of mourning, you're in fighting the Abenaki again, and you look up from reloading your musket to see your dead brother running at you with a tomahawk trying to kill you, you may just turn around and run, which is exactly what they were hoping for. We haven't seen this soldier as much since they filled in the crypt. So some people have seen him near the main entrance over here, so we think that he just made his way in that direction and is wandering around there now. But along with that soldier, we do see lots of shadowy figures pacing the walls, as if the soldiers are still doing their patrol routes, making sure everything is going okay. We hear lots of footsteps and conversations on the walls. And we also hear a lot of footsteps in the parade grounds. They usually walk from the main entrance over to the well, and that is where we're going to go next. So you guys can follow me this way. At this particular spot with, well. Now I know what you're all thinking. Holy moly, that was a bad joke. And it was, and we have lots of them. So buckle up. This is our well here at the fort. This was dug in the winter of 1756 by Robert Rogers and his rangers. This is one of 3 places you will see tonight that is actually original to the fort that was built in 1755. Not the structure, but the hole is the one that the rangers dug. Now you may be wondering, why did they bother to dig a well? Lake George is right there. The waters of Lake George are still so clean and pure that the breweries along the lake use it when they make their beer today. So you can imagine how nice it was when there weren't 10,000 boats on it every single day in the summer. Well, the issue was it was the winter of 1756. That lake was frozen over with 2 to 4 feet of ice. There were native and French patrols in the area, wandering around, waiting to pick off anyone stupid enough to leave the safety of the fort or the entrenchment camp in Battlefield Park. And so it was dangerous and impractical to send men out to the lake to hack through all that ice just to grab a couple of pails of water and try to bring it back to the fort, especially when you consider they would have had to do that nearly constantly. There were 300 to 400 British soldiers stationed inside of the fort. There were another 1,500 to 2,000 American provincials in Battlefield Park, and not to mention the literally countless camp followers, again, women and children, who came to the area with their fathers and brothers, the American provincials, and started to help out with the fort here and were living in the entrenchment camp as well. All of those people needed access to clean drinking water. And so several buckets every couple of hours wasn't going to cut it. So they dug the well. And during the winter time, it treated them very well. That is until the ground began to thaw in the spring and their water started to smell a little funny, and then it started to taste a little funny, and they realized they were not drinking crystal clear lake water. No, they were drinking water from the swamp they built the fort on. Yes. They also realized as the water quality continued to deteriorate that they had dug their latrines too close to the walls of the fort. So the sewage from the latrines was running into the swamp and into the well, and then they were drinking it. Not a good thing. To make matters worse, lots of people did die that first winter, whether from the cold or disease or the raids in the area, killing people. And they had nowhere to bury them. It was against British military regulations to bury bodies inside of the fort at the time, but they couldn't go outside of the fort to bury them because, again, there were patrols waiting to kill people who left the safety of the fort. And so their best bet was just to wait until spring and bury them then. They had the bright idea to throw the bodies over the walls, and then when the ground thawed and the weather got nice, they'd go bury them. Except throughout human history, nice weather always means fighting weather, and so they never got the chance to. Those bodies started to rot and decay in the sun. They sank into the swamp. And I bet you can guess where they ended up. So everyone here was drinking dead body sewage swamp water. I do not recommend drinking dead body sewage swamp water. You will get very, very sick. We had an outbreak of dysentery here at the fort. For those of you who don't know, dysentery is a disease where you poop yourself to the point of extreme dehydration and then you die. Lots of people started to die from dysentery. And then they had nowhere to bury them, so they went over the walls and they ended up in the swamp. And then it's just vicious cycle. Through our estimations, we believe that more British soldiers actually died because they drank water from the well than the French managed to kill in the 6-day-long siege. Which is not the greatest stat to have to give you guys at the British held fort, but what can I do? So, eventually they did figure out that it was the water killing people. And so the officers had the bright idea to replace the water rations with an equal amount of rum, which was a very well-received decision until they thought about it a little more. And they realized, you know, most of our soldiers are between the ages of 16 and 22. A lot of them are here against their will. All of them are shooting muskets and cannons on the daily. Should they be blackout drunk? No, probably not, because they might mutiny or they might kill each other. It's not a good thing. So they decided to rescind that decision and instead issued a single shot of rum to be poured into every glass of water. Because at the very least, you've watered down the rum so people are at best tipsy and no longer blackout drunk. They also thought that maybe the alcohol would help kill whatever was in the water that was making everyone sick, which it did not do. People continued to die of dysentery. But they were a little more relaxed about the fact that they were dying of dysentery. So, take the wins where you can. To our knowledge, no one has died in this spot specifically. So why do we stop here on the ghost tour? Well, this would have been the central hub of activity here at the fort when it was active. Every day, everyone who relied on the fort for safety would have had to walk to this well, get their clean drinking water, and then the soldiers would have moved on to the North Barracks where the officers were staying to get their orders for the day. We still have a lot of people making that same trek today, normally from the main entrance to the well and then on to the North Barracks. Our number one claim in this area is of disembodied footsteps. As you heard on the walk over, the gravel is very loud, and as you saw, there are not many good hiding places. So it takes only a matter of moments to look around and realize that the footsteps you hear following you don't have a body attached to them. That is the main thing that we see in this area, or here rather. We did have a reenactment group stay with us in 2015. We do reenact the siege every year. Siege Week, again, more brilliant naming. And in 2015, one group asked to sleep in the North Barracks for a night to get a feel for what it would have been like to live here at the fort. And we said, sure, go for it. So they came in their historically accurate clothing and went up to sleep in our North Barracks on the historically accurate wooden planks. And as they tried to fall asleep, they couldn't because it was way too hot. If you have a keen eye, you will notice that our air conditioning is also original to 1755 in the North Barracks. We have windows. And so they opened those windows, hoping to get a breeze through off the lake. When they did, they heard some footsteps out in the parade grounds. They looked out the window and the footsteps stopped, so they just kind of assumed it must have been a maintenance man who forgot something, so they decided to go to sleep. They woke up several hours later to hearing more footsteps in the parade grounds. They heard a couple of footsteps on the stairs outside of the North Barracks. And this time they assumed someone had broken in, so they came out and searched the fort trying to find somebody. They walked the walls, they walked through the open parts of the fort, but there was no one here. So they just kind of assumed they were overtired and they went back to bed. Several hours later, they woke up again to what sounded like marching through the parade grounds. They heard footsteps walking through the rooms they were trying to sleep in. They stopped trying to sleep in those rooms. They grabbed their lawn chairs and set them up around the well and decided to stay up and just chat through the rest of the night. Because they didn't want to chicken out completely and leave, but there was no way they were sleeping in those rooms anymore. Until morning, they continued to hear walking in the parade grounds. They heard whispered conversations up on the walls. They saw shadows walking past the windows through the rooms they had just been trying to sleep in. They have not asked to stay here since. They sleep in Battlefield Park with everyone else. We do see a lot of shadow apparitions walk past those windows. We see a woman up there as well. She has on a white dress, long dark hair. Sometimes it's flowing, sometimes it's pulled back. We think she may have been a mistress of one of the officers who was living in the North Barracks. These officers never brought their families to the New World with them, and if they did, they never brought them to Fort William Henry, because the area between Fort William Henry and Fort Edward was lovingly nicknamed by the soldiers the Valley of Death. You didn't want to bring your family to the Valley of Death. And so they would leave their families in cities. But they did still get lonely, so they would occasionally go out to the local towns and find a woman and bring her back to the fort. So we believe she may have been a mistress of one of the officers staying there who maybe died during the bastion blowing up. She may have died from dysentery. We're not entirely sure. She hasn't told us. It would be cool if she did, but they don't always hand us their business cards and say, hello, my name is Megan and this is how I died. It's neat when that does happen, but she hasn't done that. We also see a little girl in this area, Again, we're not sure who she is or when she died, but she likes to run around the well, and we see her most often running up and down the ramp of the powder magazine. And that's where we're going to head to next. We're going to go look down a long, scary hallway for a couple minutes. These cannonballs bounce and roll and vaporize human beings, but mortars explode. They have a fuse. And the French managed to shoot a mortar that had a longer fuse than the others, so it didn't detonate on impact when it hit the parade grounds. It was just by happenstance, just coincidence. But when that mortar rolled around, it actually stopped right next to that stockpile of gunpowder. And then it blew up. It blew a hole so wide in the northwest bastion that the French were able to walk in 5 abreast without touching either side of the wall. The explosion took out the western half of the north barracks and destroyed about a quarter of the west barracks. And that's how the French were able to win the siege. Now, another reason you put your gunpowder underground is to make sure that there's only one way to get to it. This is the only way in and out of the powder magazine. If you only have one way in and out, you only need one person to stand guard. They would have had a guard stationed here by the entrance to make sure no one went down and took anything they weren't authorized to. Because if you took something from any of the provision stores here that you were not given explicit access to, you weren't stealing from the fort, and you were not stealing from the officers. You were, in fact, stealing from the King of England himself, which is not a good thing to do. We didn't have any dungeons or prisons here at the fort, but if you did something you weren't supposed to, the usual punishment was getting stripped to your small clothes and beaten, and then chained to the walls of the main entrance and left there until either you died or the officers felt like releasing you. People usually died. So, you don't want to have thieves, because then your numbers dwindle. So they had a guard here to make sure no one thieved. We still have a guard stationed here most days. Sometimes when people take photographs of this area, they see a shadowy figure standing next to the entrance. We do have women on occasion get their hair pulled. Normally it's back in a ponytail. We're not entirely sure why, but women would not have been allowed down in the powder magazine, so likely the soldiers just saying, "Hey, where are you going?" without actually saying, "Hey, where are you going?" My theory is he's, again, between the ages of 16 and 22, in the wilderness with a bunch of teenagers for several years. He's just not mature enough to say, "Hey, where are you going?" Instead, his first thought is, "No, don't do that." You know, as I teach, so all of my students put their hands on each other constantly. So that's where that theory comes from. If I had a nickel for every time I said, "Take your hands off each other," I would retire. So he does occasionally pull women's hair. That happened as recently as not this past Monday, but the Monday before. There was a young lady leaving the powder magazine. The rest of the group was still in the magazine itself. One of the guides was standing at the top of the ramp talking to her. I was up in the north barracks because people kept tapping on windows that night, so I went up to check and see what was going on. And as she was leaving talking to this other guy, he saw her hair pull off her shoulder and get yanked backwards. Hard enough that she stumbled back several steps. She screamed and sprinted out of the ramp. Can't say that I blame her, but she did finish the rest of the tour, so kudos to her for that. But as recently as 2 Mondays ago, we've had someone get their hair pulled. So if you have a ponytail, watch out. He does occasionally say goodnight to people who say goodnight to him first, though, so when you leave the powder magazine, make sure you say goodnight, because again, sometimes he does say goodnight back. The other spirit we see in this area is a little girl. She likes to run up and down the ramp. She usually likes to do that when the guides are trying to leave for the night to make them chase her, and then they clock out late, and it's just a whole thing. We had one guide one night after the last tour walking through, making sure that all the doors were locked, making sure no one wandered off and got kidnapped by the skunks, as usual. And when he came to the top of the ramp, he went to close the door when he saw a shadow dart around the corner at the base of the ramp. His first thought was, well, I need to go check that out. And his second thought was, I've seen horror movies, I'm not doing that by myself. And so he closed and locked the door, and he went to get another guide to go with him. When they came back, they unlocked the door and went down and searched, and there was no one down there. They assumed it was just kind of late, you know, trick of the eye. They're all tired, so they left. They went to close the door again, and as soon as they got to the top, as they turned to close the door, they heard laughing at the base of the ramp. When they turned around, there was a little girl standing by the wall. She waved at them a little bit, and then vanished. These two guides promptly closed and locked the door and left for the night. One of them turned in his 2 weeks notice. So, normally she presents herself to guides who have worked here for a long time, but occasionally our guests do get her on photographs, so keep taking pictures, again, at any moment that you want to. If you would like to, you can head down to the powder magazine and take a moment or two to look around. I will warn you though, watch your step. Part of the ramp is original to the fort that was built in 1755, so it's quite uneven. Don't forget to say goodnight when you come back out. This cannonballs bounce and roll and vaporize human beings, but mortars explode. They have a fuse. And the French managed to shoot a mortar that had a longer fuse than the others, so it didn't detonate on impact when it hit the parade grounds. It was just by happenstance, just coincidence. But when that mortar rolled around, it actually stopped right next to that stockpile of gunpowder. And then it blew up. It blew a hole so wide in the northwest bastion that the French were able to walk in 5 abreast without touching either side of the wall. The explosion took out the western half of the north barracks and destroyed about 1/4 of the west barracks. And that's how the French were able to win the siege. Now, another reason you put your gunpowder underground is to make sure that there's only one way to get to it. This is the only way in and out of the powder magazine. If you only have one way in and out, you only need one person to stand guard. They would have had a guard stationed here by the entrance to make sure no one went down and took anything they weren't authorized to. Because if you took something from any of the provision stores here that you were not given explicit access to, you weren't stealing from the fort, and you were not stealing from the officers. You were, in fact, stealing from the King of England himself, which is not a good thing to do. We didn't have any dungeons or prisons here at the fort, but if you did something you weren't supposed to, the usual punishment was getting stripped to your small clothes and beaten, and then chained to the walls of the main entrance and left there until either you died or the officers felt like releasing you. People usually died. So, you don't want to have thieves, because then your numbers dwindle. So they had a guard here to make sure no one thieved. We still have a guard stationed here most days. Sometimes when people take photographs of this area, they see a shadowy figure standing next to the entrance. We do have women on occasion get their hair pulled, normally if it's back in a ponytail. We're not entirely sure why, but women would not have been allowed down in the powder magazine, so likely the soldiers just saying, "Hey, where are you going?" without actually saying, "Hey, where are you going?" My theory is he's, again, between the ages of 16 and 22. In the wilderness with a bunch of teenagers for several years. He's just not mature enough to say, "Hey, where are you going?" Instead, his first thought is, "No, don't do that." You know, as I teach, so all of my students put their hands on each other constantly. So that's where that theory comes from. If I had a nickel for every time I said, "Take your hands off each other," I would retire. So he does occasionally pull women's hair. That happened as recently as not this past Monday, but the Monday before. There was a young lady leaving the powder magazine. The rest of the group was still in the magazine itself. One of the guides was standing at the top of the ramp talking to her. I was up in the north barracks because people kept tapping on windows that night, so I went up to check and see what was going on. And as she was leaving talking to this other guy, he saw her hair pull off her shoulder and get yanked backwards. Hard enough that she stumbled back several steps. She screamed and sprinted out of the ramp. Can't say that I blame her, but she did finish the rest of the tour, so kudos to her for that. But as recently as 2 Mondays ago, we've had someone get their hair pulled. So if you have a ponytail, watch out. He does occasionally say goodnight to people who say goodnight to him first, though, so when you leave the powder magazine, make sure you say goodnight, because again, sometimes he does say goodnight back. The other spirit we see in this area is a little girl. She likes to run up and down the ramp. She usually likes to do that when the guides are trying to leave for the night to make them chase her, and then they clock out late, and it's just a whole thing. We had one guide one night after the last tour walking through, making sure that all the doors were locked, making sure no one wandered off and got kidnapped by the skunks, the usual. And when he came to the top of the ramp, he went to close the door when he saw a shadow dart around the corner at the base of the ramp. His first thought was, well, I need to go check that out. And his second thought was, I've seen horror movies, I'm not doing that by myself. So he closed and locked the door, and he went to get another guide to go with him. When they came back, they unlocked the door and went down and searched, and there was no one down there. They assumed it was just kind of late, you know, trick of the eye. They're all tired, so they left. They went to close the door again, and As soon as they got to the top, as they turned to close the door, they heard laughing at the base of the ramp. When they turned around, there was a little girl standing by the wall. She waved at them a little bit and then vanished. These two guides promptly closed and locked the door and left for the night. One of them turned in his 2 weeks' notice. So, normally she presents herself to guides who have worked here for a long time, but occasionally our guests do get her on photographs, so keep taking pictures, again, at any moment that you want to. If you would like to, you can head down to the Powder magazine and take a moment or two to look around. I will warn you though, watch your step. Part of the ramp is original to the fort that was built in 1755, so it's quite uneven. Don't forget to say goodnight when you come back out.
To the right, to the right.
No, they passed through here, but they never rebuilt the fort again. So it's technically a British.
I'm not going all the way down.
Is that it?
She's nice. Yep.
Alright, so we're going into the powder keg room. So, yeah, this is pretty cool so far. And we're going down in there. Ay, 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 ay. Step.
Don't fall. Not again. I'm glad Tanya's not here. Yeah, she's okay. Put your step in. That's just the door. I don't know about it.
This is the door. The powder keg room.
It's just the other side. That sounds like, is it literally just the door?
No, here's a door. Pretty cool. Yo, Johnny, I need some gunpowder. Bring that up, man. For the mortars, you heard? Stop playing. And have a good night, you heard?
The sandals,
We're gonna have to listen to.
Left side of the wall.
Step.
Don't fall. Not again. I'm glad Tanya's not here. Yeah, she's okay. Put your step in. That's just the door. I don't know about it.
This is the door. The powder keg room.
It's just the other side. That sounds like, is it literally just the door?
No, here's a door. Pretty cool. Yo, Johnny, I need some gunpowder. Bring that up, man. For the mortars, you heard? Stop playing. And have a good night, you heard?
The sandals,
We're gonna have to listen to.
Left side of the wall.
See if he says anything back. I'm going out of this thing. Check this out, man. It's wild, right? How you feeling? Ain't going out.
Maybe, I'm not sure.
Going down. This is pretty cool. This is where they held the food at and stuff like that. Original fireplace from 1755. This is pretty cool. Original fireplace. This is where they used to cook in on there. And down here is where they held the food at.
And so we read prisons when we built the casemate. And then several decades later, a historian looked at the blueprints and called us and was like, guys, that says provisions, not prisons. So we do have supplies in there. We did put a sign on it, and then we called it a day. So, all right, so you guys can scoot down a little bit. No. Yeah, so we built it like that, not wondering why, yeah, very important, yeah, pretty much. All right, so scoot down just a little bit, because we do have a large, we're against the wall, looking at this display. Find a spot that you can see the display, and then pause. Nice. Okay, so this is our surgery display. This was one of 2 emergency field hospitals that was used during the siege. I am going to describe amputations as they would have happened in the 1750s in all of their gruesome, gory detail. If that is not something that you want to hear, head down to the guard room and plug your ears. But this does get gory. So make the decision yourself. If at some point during this talk you start to feel unwell or you no longer want to listen, you can leave during the middle of it. I promise you won't hurt my feelings. Do what's best for you. Okay, we're going to get started. This is our surgery display. This is the main type of surgery at the time, which was amputation, as I mentioned earlier. So, what has to happen before you get an amputation is you need to get shot. These soldiers would have been shot by musket balls, which behave differently from modern day bullets. Modern day bullets go into your body and leave a large exit wound. Musket balls go into your body and hit bone and make that bone explode. And then your bone becomes shrapnel that destroys whatever limb your bone used to be a part of. And that's why they amputated the limbs, because it was much safer and much quicker just to chop the arm off. But it looks like this poor man was shot in the lower leg. If he had been shot in the leg, one of his buddies probably would have carried him down the stairs and sat him either on the floor or on a stool. The doctor's assistant would have handed him a bottle of rum and told him to drink until he couldn't stand anymore, which I thought the leg wound would have done, but what do I know? I'm not a doctor. Once he is hopefully blackout drunk, he would be brought over and laid down on one of the cafeteria tables, because this was the original mess hall at the fort. And the doctor would start to get going. And that rum is the best that doctor can offer you. You are going to be awake during the surgery. You are going to feel everything during the surgery, because they did not have anesthesia. They had no numbing agents. And that rum is the best he can give you, in the hopes that you will be blackout drunk and won't remember this in the morning. That's all you get. Before the doctor grabs his scalpel, he's going to take a lead musket ball and place it between the man's teeth and tell him to bite down on it. Now, yes, lead is toxic, but it's also a soft metal. It's malleable, so you won't break your teeth immediately if you bite into it. But it will prevent you from biting off your own tongue through the sheer pain of what you're about to go through. This is where we get the phrase, bite the bullet. That bullet on the corner of the table was excavated from Fort Edward and given to us, because no surgeries occurred at Fort Edward, and so we assume that this bullet came from this fort and was brought to Fort Edward with the army that marched down there after the siege. We know it was used during surgery because it has teeth marks in it. So, once you're blackout drunk and chewing on your nice lead snack, the doctor's going to grab his scalpel, which is already bloody, because this is pre-germ theory. They don't know to wash utensils and hands in between surgeries, so that's the blood of the last man, and the man before him, and before him, and before him, and so on and so forth. The doctor, if he can get a firm grip on that scalpel, is going to use it. He's going to use it to cut through the skin, the tendons, ligaments, muscle, all the way around the bone, all the way down to it. He's going to trade out that scalpel for his trusty, already bloodied saw, which is the same kind of saw that you'd use to cut down a tree today, and he's going to start sawing through the bone. The doctors here like to boast that they could get through the femur, which is the densest bone of the human body, in about 60 seconds. It took so little time because they didn't cut all the way through the bone. They stopped when they got to 80 to 85% of the way. They'd set down the saw there, they'd grab both ends of your leg and snap what was left like a twig. It was much faster, and time was of the essence, because that doctor just created a very unique issue for himself. You just drank an entire bottle of rum, and then he cut off your leg. What does alcohol do to your blood?
Thins it.
It thins it. You're not clotting. You're bleeding very quickly. So the doctor has but seconds to run over to the fireplace and grab an iron skillet he left heating in the place and bring that iron skillet over to press against the wound to cauterize it and stop the bleeding. Once that was done, he'd set the iron aside and take 2 flaps of skin he left on the end of your leg and fold them over like a bad present, and then he needs to stitch you back together. Except this doctor is not going to use regular thread because he never, ever, ever wants to see you again. He has too many patients. He doesn't have time to go through and remove stitches several weeks later. So he needs to use something organic that will absorb into your skin. They don't have the nice lab-grown organic threads that we have today. So they use the next best thing. Small animal intestines soaked in rum. As gross as it sounds, it does work. They do absorb into your skin, but I don't recommend putting animal intestines in open surgery wounds. But again, I'm not a doctor. What do I know? Once that's done, if you are still alive, because it was not a guarantee that you would survive this process, you would be bandaged up and sent down to the guard room, which was turned into an emergency recovery room. There were camp followers down there helping to tend to the wounded soldiers, but the bulk of keeping the wound clean came to the soldier himself. What do you guys think these soldiers are using to clean their wounds with? Rum. You would think rum, but rum is for drinking. Those of you who said the well water, you're correct. It was the dysentery, dead body, sewage, swamp water. Naturally, lots of men get infections. The main infection was gangrene, and the only way to deal with gangrene was to drink a bottle of rum, chew on some lead, lay down, and cut a little higher. We have the medical report of one soldier here who lost his lower foot, and then that foot got infected. And he came back for 9 more amputations, and his hip got infected, and he had no more leg to cut off, and he died. So, this was not a guarantee of survival, but it did better the odds enough that they thought it was worth it. Congratulations on surviving the surgery talk. Now I get to talk about the ghosts. Naturally, with this area having a lot of trauma in it, there is a lot of activity left. We do see a lot of orbs in this area in photographs and videos. Things like to move around in the display without anyone having been down in the casemate, let alone in the display area. And we also see a figure that we call Doc. Now, Doc presents himself as a 6-foot-tall shadow figure. He likes to hang out between these 2 nightmare mannequins here. And we call him Doc not because he's in the surgery display, but because he is 6 foot tall. At the time, the British believed that the taller you were, the smarter you were. So all of their tall soldiers became doctors to take care of their short, dumb soldiers, because obviously they were smart. And Doc fits the height requirement for being a doctor. So we call him Doc. Feel free to take some photos. And when you're done, we're going to meet and congregate around the staircase. I'm going to scoot past you guys. If you want to rob and kill a bunch of people, you go to where they can't defend themselves. The hospital. There were just wounded soldiers and women and children down here. Pretty much everyone down here died. The natives killed their way through this casemate. There was nowhere for the people down here to go because that staircase at the far end, where they were coming from, was the only way in and out. These stairs are a modern addition. They're only here because OSHA said we had to have a fire exit. So people down here had nowhere to go. From these psychics, we also got how he died. They told us a very similar story, and that is that when he came into the casemate, as he was killing his way through this area, he eventually came across a mother and her very young child. And the way the mother was begging for her and her child's life struck a chord within him. He felt a great deal of sympathy for them. He didn't understand the language, but he understood the intent. He respected that, realized they were non-combatants, and decided to spare their lives. So he turned away and continued killing the others around them. Now, this mother didn't quite trust that kindness, because obviously everyone around her was being killed. So she grabbed a knife off of a nearby table and stabbed him in the back and killed him. And that's how he died. He's not fond of women for obvious reasons, but he's even less fond of women who bring their very young children with them. But he despises people who go into his space with the intent of causing trouble. We think he stays underneath the staircase here because it's the safest spot for him to be. It's very easily to defend that area. There are British soldiers all throughout this area and throughout the fort. So that's where he comes to rest when he needs a place to be safe. So people who go under there and try to start trouble very quickly realize that that's a very bad idea. We did have a gentleman on one of our tours several years ago. He was kind of drunk. This guy is the reason you're not allowed to be drunk on the tours anymore. And when he was making his way through the fort, he was trying to start something. He wanted something paranormal to happen. We don't promise it will. He was getting frustrated, but the rest of the tour thought that this man was hilarious, so they were egging him on the entire time. And when we got to the casemate, this man heard the story of him and decided to start more trouble. He went underneath the stairs and started shouting horrible, racist, vile things at him. He started to punch the air as if he were shadowboxing the ghost. And the guides had had enough of this man and the whole tour. They got him out from under the stairs. They told everyone to leave because that was not fair to him and not safe for anyone else who had to come back down here later. And they made sure that that man was the last person out of the casemate so he didn't start any more trouble with anyone who was still alive. When he got to this step here, he fell forward onto his hands. And he said, "Who pushed me?" And the guides said, "You are drunk and obnoxious. Get out of the fort and never come back." So as he was making his way through the fort, leaving and hopefully never coming back, he started to complain that his back was burning. And burning and burning and burning, and he was so insistent that by the time they got back to the lobby, his wife decided to humor him and lift his shirt. And she found, from shoulder to opposite hip, 3 long red scratch marks, as if someone got tired of his nonsense as well. That man is not the only one who has been scratched by him. Again, usually it's people who antagonize him and try to make him angry. So please don't do that, because it's, again, not fair to him and not safe for anyone else. But if you would like to, you can take a couple of photographs of that area. We do have a shrine under the stairs for him. Paranormal investigators and guides leave things like flowers, money, cigarettes, feathers, anything that we think that he might like that might make him more comfortable. So if you go under the stairs, which you can, please don't start anything. Please don't touch that shrine. But when you're done taking your photographs, you can head down to the guard room, and Brian is going to take over for the next 20 minutes to half hour or so. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice rest here. We read prisons, but William Eyre had really bad handwriting, and so we built the prison. And then a couple of decades later, a historian built the prison.
So you guys heard all the tales.
But we had already built them,
We're gonna actually
and so we decided let's
here tonight.
apply it there.
Is it done?
Done.
This is
Head to hold still.
stairs here.
Let's see. All right, so
You're not funny.
Having a good time on the tour?
Yes.
Been hearing some spooky, gruesome stories? All right, up until now, you've heard the stories. They've told you the tales. It's now time to try to actually get in touch with it. I was about to start on the next leg of my investigation, but since you guys are here, you might as well join me on it. What do you think?
Yeah.
All right, good. I've just set out REM pods on the table. Does everyone know what they are?
Yep.
Okay, well, TSA hates these. So when these are in my bag, and especially in great numbers, I always get selected for random additional screening. For those of you who don't know what they are, these generate an electromagnetic field, which is kind of like a bubble, and if something comes into that field, lights and sound. Stop.
Is there someone there?
No, it's just temperamental. So these are set up on the table, so if there's any spirits who are here with us, maybe you can't communicate in any other way, feel free to come and touch any of these. And the rule, as always, is once for yes, twice for no. So if we ask you a question and the answer is yes, 1. If it's no, or any combination on any of these. The group is large, so I think we're going to do a necrophonic session. This is an app on the iPad. You can get this on your phone. it's one of the newer ways that we use to try to connect and gather data. Now, the theory behind this is, all right, this app has sound banks of random noises and phenomes and just other sounds that spirits can arrange to make words. Now, anytime I'm using something that could possibly be giving random, because it just sounds a little better, it gives me a little more time to catch the sounds. It goes a little something like this. Ready, big man? All right, I'd love to hear the password. Could you say the password for me, please? Now, I don't always hear things because I'm listening to something else. If any of you hear the password, don't keep it to yourself. Let me know. Nice. If anyone's here with us, can you tell us the password, please? Just to let us know that you can understand this. And it said you won't get it. I am blood. What? Well, don't give me attitude. I've been doing this all night. Okay, slow down. Slow down. One at a time, please. Pasta. You hear that? All right, thank you for that. All right, now that you said the password, you've got the floor. Do you have a message for us? Powder? They stored powder nearby, yeah?
Yes, right nearby, right up there.
Are you still on duty? Yep. Soldier, name, rank. Alright, somebody throw out some questions. How about you guys? Throw out a question.
How old are you?
19. He's one of the older ones.
It's in 19.
We all heard different numbers, but we all heard something teen.
I have a question.
Yeah, what do you got?
Are you nice?
Yeah.
Yeah. We only want to talk to the nice ones. Please. Say that louder. Here. Shut up. Who? Yes. Who? Do you have a specific message for us? Look at it. Look at what? What do you want us to look at? Leave?
Oh.
Okay, whoa, slow down. Slow it down. Thank you. One at a time. You get all excited. They all want to say things. All right. Just out of curiosity. How many fingers am I holding up? 3.
Your Honor.
I'm sorry.
From the witness and only the witness.
The witness.
I wore this ridiculous thing for you.
You serious about that?
How many fingers am I holding up for the German? Thank you. Thank you.
Said 3 a few times.
Still 3. All right, you can see us, you can understand us, you've said the password. What's her name?
Henry.
Henry. Hello. Hi, Henry. Ian. Hi, Ian.
Hi.
You got a question for Ian? Introduce yourself. He's told you his name. What's your name?
My name's Ben.
Is he military?
No.
No.
How did he die?
They don't always know that they're dead. Now comes a big shock.
What year is it?
Ask that again.
What year is it?
I heard 10 and then please help.
The girl. The girl.
Who needs help? Go away. I can't. I'm contracted for at least one more hunt tonight.
Does he feel safe here?
Very.
Are we bothering you?
A little bit. A little bit.
Oh, that makes sense.
We don't mean any harm or disrespect. We're just curious.
Who's
Curious
the girl?
about you.
Who's the girl? Who's the girl?
Her name, Violet. Is it Violet? Yes. The girl's name is Violet.
Are you trapped here? Are you trapped here?
Yes. Okay.
Go with female too.
Okay, Violet, who's keeping you here? Say it. Say it.
Ian.
Ian? Is Ian keeping you here? I thought Ian was nice. Yes. All right, so it's not Ian. Who's keeping you? Everyone else?
Can you set off one of these things on the table?
So he said, actually, no. Why not? Leave, no. This one. No.
Can we help?
I heard Scott again. Who's Scott? Scott was asked for earlier tonight. The name keeps coming up. All right, who's Scott? She's not Scottish. Hey, Pikachu, you got a question? Come on, we gotta catch them all. We need your help.
He has a question.
I will come back to you if you think of anything.
We have a question.
What do you got?
Is there any kids here?
In there. Where? Go in there. There. For a second. Where? In there?
Kids?
In there? Not in there? They're down there? Teacher. Do you want it? I want to get back to Violet. Violet, are you still here with us? I'm hiding away. Okay, who are you hiding from? Come on.
How old was Violet? How old is Violet?
This is 19 before.
That was someone else, yeah. That was a girl, little girl.
Where are your parents?
Yeah, Violet, where are your parents?
I don't know.
Good way out. Gone. They won't? Killed. You're standing up on my neck. I'm sorry.
Ducks. Ducks, what she was a guy that used to be the doctor.
Can you repeat that? I'm here. Okay, Jeff, you're here. What can you tell us? What can we do for you? And remember that the password is still in play, so if you want to come to the mic, say the password for us. I heard welcome to mine, and I lost it. Welcome to your what? Rose.
Oh, okay. Pond.
Okay, all right, Rose is here. What have you got to say to Rose? Something so many.
Yeah,
Us.
The
I've
green
been
light.
hearing lots of stuff
The green light.
upstairs.
That one in a second. The green light. There you go. Okay, beautiful.
Okay, Rose is here.
Well, what do you want to say?
Hurry up. What do you want her to hurry up with?
Us?
Who's that? You know what?
Who's upstairs?
Upstairs.
Follow.
Follow.
I thought so.
Oh, someone touched it.
That's my baby. Who's your baby? Is that me? The range on this seems to be more today. It's not usually you have to get right up on it. Like, see?
Yeah.
Was you?
Might be not. There might be not.
Maybe I was standing in this spot.
Maybe.
Do you want us to get out of here? Do you want us to leave? The stereotypical ghost thing, get out? Do you want us to do that?
I heard ghosts.
All right, so we need something concrete from Violet or Ian. What's the message? Do it. What do you want us to do? We've heard this several times.
Someone's there.
There we go. REM pod.
Thank you. Okay, if you can keep making that go off, I'd appreciate that. Give it a touch. This is just so we know you're here. Here. Prisons.
Does one of you have a music box?
What?
I thought I heard vegan.
She asked if you have a music box. Sounds like static. You can make one of these light up. You did that one. All right, you're doing a good job with that one. Can you keep at it? Can you make it light up to the shoe light? Go for two. Anyone else have any other questions?
How many people are here?
Do you leave this room? Do you leave this room?
Some overlapping answers. Twice for no. No. If we're gonna go by those rules, that was twice for no. Yeah. Here. Alright, we're gonna let you go in a minute, but thank you for your time. If there's anything else you want to say to us before we go,
Thank you for your service.
Are you all good people in here?
say that again.
Are you all good people in here?
Some of us. And then no.
Two.
Two.
Two again.
Back on again. And at 65%. That was pretty cool.
Thank you.
We made it back out. We made it through the walls
It was good.
and through the outside. Fort William Henry ghost tour. Pretty cool.
Yes, it was.
All right, let's get out of here.